December 2019 brought one of the worst ice storms in Kentucky's history. Power lines snapped across 3 counties, leaving thousands in the dark for days. Emergency services were overwhelmed. Communication systems failed. It was during this chaos that radio operator Ezekiel Blackwood encountered something that still gives him nightmares. Ezekiel ran a small emergency radio station from his home, providing weather updates and emergency coordination when official channels failed. He'd been doing it for 15 years. He knew every voice in the emergency response community. He knew their call signs, their personalities, their speech patterns. On the second night of the blackout around 2 a.m., his radio crackled to life with a transmission that shouldn't have existed. Emergency services, this is Patrol Unit 77. I need immediate assistance at mile marker 15 on Highway 421. Officer down. Repeat, officer down. Ezekiel's blood ran cold. Patrol Unit 77 had been discontinued 8 years earlier. The officer who used that call sign, Deputy Marcus Henley, had died in a car accident during an ice storm remarkably similar to this one. Same conditions, same highway, even the same date, 8 years apart. But the voice was unmistakably Henley's. Ezekiel had worked with him dozens of times during emergencies. The speech pattern, the slight Kentucky drawl, even Henley's habit of saying, repeat, instead of again when clarifying information. Unit 77, this is base station. Confirm your location and nature of emergency, Ezekiel responded, following protocol despite his confusion. Static filled the channel for nearly a minute. Then Henley's voice returned. But something was wrong. The quality had changed. It sounded distant, like the transmission was coming from very far away or very deep underground. Base station, I'm trapped in my vehicle. Ice storm caused a rollover at mile marker 15. I can see lights approaching, but they're not emergency lights. They're moving wrong, too fast, too bright, and they're coming from below the road surface. Ezekiel checked his emergency database. Mile marker 15 on Highway 421 was the exact location where Deputy Henley had died 8 years earlier. His patrol car had skidded on ice and rolled into a drainage ditch. He'd been found the next morning, already deceased from his injuries. Unit 77, I need you to clarify your situation. Are you injured? Do you need medical assistance? The response came immediately, but Henley's voice had changed again. Now it sounded strained, frightened, in a way that the real Deputy Henley never had been. Henley was known for staying calm under pressure. Base station, the lights are getting closer. I can hear them moving through the ice, scraping sounds. Like metal on metal, but organic somehow, and voices. There are voices, coming from underground. They're calling my name. They know my name, base station. How do they know my name? Ezekiel documented everything, as he always did during emergencies, but he also made a decision that broke protocol. He called the current sheriff's department to report the transmission. They confirmed what he already knew. No units were patrolling Highway 421. The road had been closed since the storm began. And Unit 77 had been decommissioned years earlier. But the transmissions continued for 3 more hours. Henley described lights that moved beneath the frozen ground, like fish swimming under ice. He reported voices that spoke in languages he didn't recognize, but somehow understood. He talked about figures that stood at the edges of his vision, never quite visible when he looked directly at them. The most disturbing part came near dawn, when Henley's transmissions began overlapping with themselves. Ezekiel would hear the deputy reporting a situation, then hear the exact same words repeated moments later in a slightly different tone, like an echo but not quite right, like multiple versions of the same conversation happening simultaneously. Base station, I need you to understand something, came Henley's voice, clearer than it had been all night. I died here 8 years ago. I know that. But every year, during storms like this, I wake up in that car again. I relive the same night, the same accident, the same visitors. The lights aren't rescue workers, base station. They never were. There's something that feeds on moments like this. Moments when someone dies alone, afraid, calling for help that never comes. They preserve these moments, loop them, and they feed on the fear, over and over again. The final transmission came just as the sun rose and power began returning to the area. Base station, I can see other cars now, other accidents, other storms. They are all here, underneath the ice. Everyone who ever died alone on this stretch of road. We are all here, together, and we're all still calling for help, still hoping someone will answer. Don't come looking for us, base station. Don't send anyone to mile marker 15, because if you do, you'll see the lights too, and once you see them, you'll join us down here, forever, calling for help that will never come. The radio went silent. Ezekiel never reported those final transmissions to the sheriff's department, but he did research the history of Highway 421. In the past 50 years, 17 people had died in weather-related accidents on that stretch of road, all during ice storms, all alone, all at or near mile marker 15. And according to emergency service records, several of those accidents had involved radio transmissions that continued long after the drivers should have been deceased. Transmissions that emergency responders had dismissed as equipment malfunctions or overlapping signals from other jurisdictions. Ezekiel doesn't operate his emergency radio during ice storms anymore, but sometimes, on particularly cold nights when the power flickers, he still hears Deputy Henley's voice coming through the static, still calling for help, still describing the lights that move beneath the frozen ground, still warning others not to come looking. The Amazon distribution center outside Phoenix operated around the clock, processing thousands of packages daily for next-day delivery across the Southwest. The facility's automated systems rarely failed, but in August 2021, a combination of extreme heat and electrical grid overload caused a complete power failure that lasted 9 hours. Everett Sutton had been driving delivery routes for Amazon for 3 years. He knew every neighborhood in his assigned territory, every shortcut, every house that had aggressive dogs or confusing address numbers. He prided himself on maintaining a perfect delivery record, even during Phoenix's brutal summer months, when temperatures regularly hit 115 degrees. The day the power went out, Everett had already loaded his van with 180 packages for delivery. When the distribution center went dark, management made the decision to send drivers out anyway, rather than lose an entire day of deliveries. They handed out paper route sheets, since the digital scanners weren't working, and told drivers to do their best with manual tracking. Everett's route that day included Desert Vista Estates, a subdivision built on the outskirts of Phoenix where the city met raw desert. He'd delivered there before and remembered it as a typical planned community with identical houses, manicured lawns, and streets with names like Saguaro Drive and Sunset Ridge Boulevard. The first sign something was wrong came when Everett's GPS lost signal as he entered the subdivision. He pulled over and checked his paper route sheet. According to the manifest, he had 17 packages for Desert Vista Estates addresses. As Everett started his deliveries, he immediately noticed the neighborhood looked different. The houses were the same style and color, but they seemed older, more faded. Most noticeable was the complete absence of residents, cars, or any signs of life. The first address was 2847 Saguaro Drive. When Everett approached the front door, he noticed the house number matched his delivery sheet, but the mailbox showed a different number, 1962. The second delivery showed the same pattern. Correct address on the door, but the mailbox read 1963. By the fifth delivery, Everett realized every mailbox showed a year from the 1960s, while the door numbers matched his route perfectly. The neighborhood was eerily silent. No air conditioning units running despite the 112-degree heat. No dogs barking, no children playing. The silence was oppressive. At the eighth delivery, something changed. As Everett approached the house at the end of Cactus Flower Lane, the front door opened before he could knock. A woman in her 60s stood in the doorway, wearing a dress that looked like it was from the 1960s. Her hair was styled in an elaborate beehive, and she smiled in a way that didn't reach her eyes. "You're right on time," she said. Everett looked at his watch. It was 2:47 p.m. He hadn't been given a specific delivery time. "Package for Margaret Chen," Everett said, reading the label. "That's me," she replied, but made no move to take the package. Margaret signed for the delivery. But when Everett looked at the signature, it was just wavy lines that didn't resemble letters. "Will you be making the other deliveries today?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am. I have 9 more stops." Her smile widened. "They'll be so pleased. We don't get many visitors anymore." Something about "anymore" made Everett's skin crawl. At the next address, another resident was waiting by the front door. An elderly man in a decades-old suit. "Right on time," he said, echoing Margaret's exact words. He signed with the same meaningless scribbles. This pattern continued for 3 more deliveries. Each time, a resident waited by the door. Each time, they said "right on time." Each time, they signed with wavy lines instead of letters. Everett was getting scared. The heat seemed more intense than anywhere else in Phoenix, and the silence felt unnatural. He had 4 packages left when he reached 7394 Saguaro Drive. This time, no one waited by the door. Everett knocked twice with no answer. The package was addressed to the residents of 7394 Saguaro Drive, not to a specific name like the others. As he turned to leave the package, a voice behind him said, "Don't go." Everett spun around. A young girl, maybe 10 years old, stood in the doorway wearing a school dress that looked like it was from the 1960s. "Don't deliver the other packages," she said. "You need to leave now." "Why?" "Because they're not real. None of them are real. This place isn't real." Everett stared at her. "What do you mean?" Desert Vista Estates was demolished in 1967. There was a gas explosion during construction that killed 37 people. The developer covered it up and built a new subdivision with the same name in a different location. The girl stepped closer. "But sometimes, when the heat gets bad and the power goes out, the old Desert Vista Estates comes back, and the people who died here come back too." "That's impossible," Everett said, but his hands were shaking. "Look at your delivery sheet." Everett pulled out the paper. The addresses were still there, but now he could see something in tiny print at the bottom of each line, dates from 1967. "They died waiting for deliveries that never came," the girl explained. "Pages, packages, groceries, they're still waiting." "Who are you?" "I lived here before the explosion. I've been trying to warn delivery drivers for years, but most can't see me." Everett looked around. The neighborhood suddenly appeared more faded, almost translucent. The perfect lawns were gone, replaced by desert scrub and construction debris. "What happens if I deliver the other packages?" "You become part of the route, forever." Everett ran to his van and threw the remaining packages in the back. He started the engine and drove toward the subdivision's exit, but the street stretched on forever. Every turn led to another identical street, with identical houses and identical residents, standing in doorways, smiling and waiting. His fuel gauge showed empty, though he'd filled up that morning. In desperation, Everett stopped and opened his cargo door. The 3 remaining packages were glowing with a faint, sickly light. Without thinking, Everett grabbed all 3 packages and threw them into the desert. They disappeared into the sand without sound. Immediately, the neighborhood began to fade. The houses became transparent, the residents disappeared, and the oppressive silence was broken by wind and distant traffic. Everett found himself in an empty lot with construction debris and a historical marker reading, "Site of Desert Vista Estates, Memorial to the 37 victims of the gas explosion of August 15, 1967. His van was parked on a dirt road connecting to the main highway. In the distance, he could see the real Desert Vista Estates, built 2 miles away in the 1990s. His phone suddenly had signal again. 17 missed calls from his dispatcher. That night, Everett researched the 1967 explosion. 37 people had died when a construction accident ruptured a gas line. The victims included families, construction workers, and delivery drivers who happened to be in the neighborhood. Several victims had been waiting for deliveries when the explosion occurred. Everett requested a transfer to a different route the next day. But sometimes on particularly hot Phoenix afternoons, when the power grid struggles, other Amazon drivers call him about a strange subdivision that appears on GPS but isn't on any map. A place where residents wait by doors with smiles that don't reach their eyes, ready to sign for packages with signatures that aren't quite human. Everett always tells them what the little girl told him.
Don't deliver the packages, just leave. Some routes are meant to stay unfinished.
Mercy General Hospital had protocols for everything, including power outages. Backup generators kicked in within seconds of any electrical failure, maintaining life support systems and critical lighting throughout the facility. But in January 2021, during the worst winter storm in Texas history, even those backup systems failed. Dr. Quinlan Ashford was working the night shift in the cardiac unit when the hospital plunged into complete darkness. Emergency battery lighting provided minimal illumination in the hallways, but most patient rooms went completely black. The staff immediately began implementing blackout protocols, checking on patients manually, and preparing for potential evacuations. Quinlan was making rounds with a flashlight when he encountered someone he didn't recognize. A man in a doctor's coat was moving between patient rooms with a clipboard, checking on people with practiced efficiency. The man looked familiar, but Quinlan couldn't place him. "Are you from another department?" Quinlan asked, approaching the stranger. "I don't think we've met. I'm Dr. Ashford." The man looked up and smiled. He appeared to be in his 60s, with gray hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. His ID badge was too dark to read clearly in the dim lighting. "Dr. Edmund Graves," he said, extending his hand. "I'm covering some extra shifts during the emergency. Came in when I heard about the power situation. These old bones have seen plenty of blackouts over the years." Something about the name Edmund Graves nagged at Quinlan's memory, but he was too focused on patient care to pursue it. The hospital was in crisis mode, and an extra doctor was a welcome addition to their stretched resources. For the next 4 hours, Dr. Graves was everywhere at once. He seemed to know exactly which patients needed immediate attention, anticipating medical crisis before they occurred. When Mrs. Patterson in room 314 went into cardiac distress, Dr. Graves was already heading to her room with the necessary equipment. When Mr. Chen's blood pressure spiked dangerously in the ICU, Dr. Graves appeared with medication before anyone had even noticed the problem. He seemed to get— "How did you know about Mrs. Patterson?" Quinlan asked after they successfully stabilized her condition using manual procedures in the dark. Dr. Graves smiled in that gentle way of his. "Experience, son. 40 years of night shifts teaches you to read the signs. You learn to sense when someone's body is about to give up fighting. It's not medical school knowledge. It's something deeper than that." As the night progressed, Quinlan began noticing other strange things about Dr. Graves. The man never seemed to use his flashlight, yet he navigated the dark hospital with perfect confidence. He knew where every piece of equipment was located, even in departments that had been reorganized recently. Most importantly, every patient he treated showed immediate improvement, even those who had been unresponsive for weeks. During a brief break around 3 a.m., Quinlan decided to look up Dr. Graves in the hospital database. What he found made his blood run cold. Dr. Edmund Graves had worked at Mercy General for 38 years before dying of a heart attack in 2018. He had collapsed while working a night shift during a power outage caused by a severe storm. He was found in the cardiac unit, still holding a patient's chart, apparently having worked until the very moment his heart stopped. Quinlan stared at the computer screen showing Dr. Graves' memorial page. The photo matched exactly the man he'd been working alongside all night. Same face, same gentle smile, same wire-rimmed glasses. He ran back to find Dr. Graves, but the man had vanished. Quinlan searched every floor, every department, every room in the hospital. None of the other staff members remembered seeing him. When Quinlan asked the head nurse about the extra doctor who had been helping during the blackout, she looked at him strangely. "Dr. Ashford, you've been working alone all night. I've been watching you make rounds by yourself for hours. Are you feeling all right? The stress of the blackout can play tricks on people's minds." But Quinlan knew what he'd seen. And more importantly, he knew Dr. Graves' work had been real. Mrs. Patterson was stable. Mr. Chen's blood pressure was normal. 6 other critical patients who had been close to death at the beginning of the blackout were now resting comfortably. Someone had provided expert medical care during the most critical hours of the emergency. Someone who knew the hospital better than any living staff member. Someone who had kept people alive when all the modern equipment had failed. Just before dawn, as emergency power finally flickered back to life, Quinlan made one final discovery. In the staff break room, he found a clipboard with patient notes written in handwriting he didn't recognize. The notes were incredibly detailed, showing a level of medical insight that went far beyond standard care. At the bottom of the last page, there was a message written in the same careful handwriting. "Thank you for letting me help tonight, Dr. Ashford. It felt good to practice medicine again. Take care of our patients. They are in excellent hands now." The message was signed Dr. Edmund Graves, with a date from 2018, the night he had died. Quinlan kept those notes, and over the following months he researched Dr. Graves' career at Mercy General. What he discovered was remarkable. Dr. Graves had been legendary among the hospital staff for his dedication to patient care. He had worked more night shifts than any other doctor in the hospital's history. He had stayed late countless times to care for patients who had no one else to advocate for them. And according to hospital records, Dr. Graves had died during a blackout very similar to the one Quinlan had experienced. The power had failed during a severe storm. Backup generators had malfunctioned, and the hospital had been plunged into darkness for nearly 8 hours. Dr. Graves had continued working throughout the entire emergency, manually monitoring patients and providing care without any modern equipment. He had saved 17 lives that night before his own heart finally gave out from the stress and exhaustion. The official cause of death was listed as cardiac arrest brought on by overexertion. But the nurses who found him said something strange. Despite having worked for 8 straight hours in crisis conditions, Dr. Graves was found sitting peacefully in a chair, still holding a patient chart, with what appeared to be a satisfied smile on his face. Now, whenever Mercy General experiences power outages, the night staff reports similar encounters. A kindly older doctor who appears during the darkest hours, providing expert care when the hospital's systems fail. A man who seems to know every patient's history, every room's layout, every piece of equipment's location. The administration dismisses these reports as stress-induced hallucinations brought on by emergency conditions, but the patient outcomes during blackouts are consistently excellent. Survival rates during power outages are actually higher than during normal operations, as if someone with decades of experience is providing care that goes beyond what the current staff could achieve alone. Quinlan never reported his encounter with Dr. Graves officially, but he kept those handwritten notes, and sometimes during quiet night shifts when the hospital feels particularly empty, he reads them and feels comforted knowing that some people care so deeply about healing others that not even death can stop them from making their rounds. The last entry in Dr. Graves' notes from that night reads, "Medicine is about being present when people need you most. Darkness is just another condition to work around. The important thing is never to abandon your post, never to stop caring, and never to let patients face their fears alone." Quinlan has tried to live by those words, and sometimes during the most difficult cases, he swears he can sense Dr. Graves standing beside him, offering gentle guidance through the darkness. Thaddeus Morrison lived alone in his 2-story house in Rochester, New York. February 2019 brought one of the worst ice storms the region had seen in decades. Power lines snapped like twigs under the weight of ice, leaving entire neighborhoods in complete darkness for days. Thaddeus had been a widower for 3 years. His wife Clara had died suddenly from a heart attack while he was at work. The guilt ate at him every day. He should have been there, should have called the ambulance sooner, should have done something different. On the third night of the blackout, Thaddeus sat by his battery-powered radio, listening to emergency broadcasts. The house creaked and groaned around him as ice continued to accumulate on the roof. Around midnight, the radio began picking up strange interference. At first, it sounded like typical static, but as Thaddeus adjusted the dial, trying to find a clearer signal, he heard something that made his blood freeze. Through the crackling white noise came a voice, faint, distorted, but unmistakably familiar. "Thaddeus! Thaddeus, where are you?" It was Clara's voice. Thaddeus dropped the radio, his hands shaking. The device hit the floor, but kept broadcasting. The voice continued, clearer now, more insistent. "I've been waiting for you, Thaddeus. Why didn't you come home? Why didn't you save me?" He scrambled to turn off the radio, but his trembling fingers couldn't find the switch in the darkness. The voice grew louder, more accusatory. "You let me die alone. You let me die calling your name, and you weren't there." Thaddeus finally managed to shut off the radio, plunging the room into complete silence. He sat there in the dark, breathing heavily, trying to convince himself it was just his imagination playing tricks on him. Grief does strange things to the mind, he told himself. The isolation, the stress of the blackout, it was all getting to him. But then he heard footsteps upstairs. Slow, deliberate footsteps moving across the bedroom floor. The same bedroom where Clara had collapsed 3 years ago. The footsteps he used to hear every morning as she got ready for work.
Thaddeus grabbed his flashlight and crept up the stairs. Each step seemed to echo through the house like thunder. When he reached the bedroom door, the footsteps stopped. He pushed the door open and swept the flashlight beam across the room. Nothing. Just the empty bed, the dresser, the chair where Clara used to sit and put on her shoes. As he turned to leave, the radio downstairs crackled back to life. Impossible. He had turned it off, even removed the batteries. But Clara's voice drifted up from the living room, crystal clear now. "Don't leave me again, Thaddeus. Don't leave me in the dark." This time he didn't go downstairs. He locked himself in the bedroom and waited. The voice continued through the night, sometimes pleading, sometimes angry, always heartbreakingly familiar. It told him things only Clara could know, private conversations they'd had, secrets they'd shared, the last words she'd tried to say before the heart attack took her. When dawn broke and the power company finally restored electricity, Thaddeus found the radio in the living room. The batteries were corroded and completely dead. They had been for hours. He never told anyone about that night, but every time there's a power outage in Rochester, Thaddeus packs a bag and drives to his sister's house in Buffalo. He won't stay alone in the dark anymore, because some voices, once heard, never really go away. The strange thing is, after that night, Thaddeus found peace with Clara's death for the first time in 3 years. Whether it was really her voice or just his mind finally processing his grief, he never knew. But he stopped blaming himself. The guilt that had consumed him for so long simply vanished. Sometimes the darkness doesn't just take things away. Sometimes it gives you exactly what you need to hear, even if it's the last thing you want to believe.
Dashiell Montgomery worked for a medical supply company in Minneapolis. His job was delivering emergency medical equipment to hospitals during crises. Ventilators, oxygen concentrators, whatever was desperately needed. December 2020 was the worst month of the pandemic. and Dashiell was working 18-hour shifts just to keep up with demand. The ice storm hit on December 18th, knocking out power to most of the city. Dashiell was driving a truck full of ventilators to Mercy General Hospital when the streetlights went dead. Traffic signals failed, plunging the entire downtown area into chaos and darkness. His GPS died with the cell towers, but Dashiell knew the city well enough to navigate by landmarks. The hospital was only 6 blocks away. What should have been a 10-minute drive turned into an hour of creeping through blacked-out streets, filled with abandoned cars and confused pedestrians. When Dashiell finally reached the hospital district, something was wrong. Mercy General should have been lit up like a Christmas tree. Hospitals have massive backup generators that kick in during power failures, but the building was completely dark. He parked the truck and walked to the emergency room entrance. The automatic doors didn't open. Through the glass, he could see the lobby was pitch black. No emergency lighting, no staff, no patients. The hospital appeared to be completely abandoned. Dashiell checked his delivery paperwork. This was definitely the right address, 1247 Medical Center Drive. But something wasn't adding up. He pulled out his phone and used the last bit of battery to call the hospital's emergency number.
The number you have dialed is not in service,
Came the automated response. That couldn't be right. Dashiell had called that same number dozens of times over the past year. He tried the main hospital line, then the emergency department direct line. All gave the same message, not in service. As he stood in front of the dark hospital, Dashiell noticed other details that seemed off. The parking lot was completely empty. No staff cars, no ambulances, no signs that anyone had been here recently. The landscaping around the building was overgrown, weeds pushing through cracks in the sidewalk. But the strangest thing was the building directory next to the entrance. Where it should have listed Mercy General Hospital, it instead read Mercy General Medical Center, closed 2018, demolition scheduled. Dashiell's blood ran cold. He had been making deliveries to this hospital for over 2 years. He had walked through these doors hundreds of times. He knew the layout, knew the staff, knew exactly where to take emergency equipment. Using his phone's flashlight, he walked around the building. Every entrance was chained shut. Metal signs posted on the doors read, "Condemned, no entry, by order of the City Health Department." The signs were dated October 2018. But that was impossible. Just last week, Dashiell had delivered oxygen concentrators here. He remembered talking to Dr. Sarah Martinez about the surge in COVID patients. He remembered the busy ICU, the overworked nurses, the desperate need for more equipment. As he stood there trying to make sense of the situation, Dashiell heard something that made his heart stop. From inside the supposedly abandoned building came the sound of a ventilator, the distinctive mechanical breathing sound he knew so well from all his deliveries. Then another ventilator joined it, then another. Soon, the entire dark building was filled with the rhythmic sounds of dozens of ventilators running at once. Dashiell pressed his face to the glass doors, trying to see inside. His phone's flashlight barely penetrated the darkness, but he could make out shapes in the lobby, what looked like hospital beds lined up in rows, and on each bed, a still figure connected to machines that shouldn't have been working in a building without power. The ventilators continued their mechanical breathing symphony, but there was something wrong with the rhythm. They weren't synchronized with human breathing patterns. They were all running at exactly the same speed, inhaling and exhaling in perfect unison, like some kind of mechanical choir. Dashiell ran back to his truck and checked his delivery logs on his tablet. According to the records, he had made 17 deliveries to Mercy General Hospital in the past 6 months. Each delivery was documented with timestamps, signatures, and photos of the equipment being installed. But as he scrolled through the photos, his hands began to shake. The images showed him placing ventilators in hospital rooms, but the rooms looked wrong. The walls were water damaged and peeling. The floors were covered in debris. The medical staff in the photos had faces that were somehow blurred, as if the camera couldn't quite focus on their features. In one photo, taken just a week earlier, Daschle could see himself shaking hands with someone in a white coat, but the person's hand in the photo was gray and mottled, like it had been dead for days. The ventilators inside the abandoned hospital continued their mechanical breathing until dawn. When the power was restored and the city began functioning normally again, Daschle drove past Mercy General one more time. The building was gone. In its place was an empty lot with a sign that read, "Future Site of Mercy General Memorial Park, honoring those lost to the 2018 outbreak." But in his truck, Daschle still had 17 signed delivery receipts from a hospital that had been demolished 4 years ago. Receipts signed by doctors who had died in 2018 when the original Mercy General was evacuated and sealed due to a contamination incident that killed 37 people. People who had been on ventilators when they died. Xander Blackwood was the facilities manager for a data center in Austin, Texas. The building housed servers for dozens of companies, storing everything from financial records to social media data. Power outages weren't just inconvenient for a data center. They were catastrophic. That's why the facility had multiple layers of backup systems, including 6 massive diesel generators that could run the entire operation for weeks. The blackout hit during the February 2021 winter storm that crippled the Texas power grid. As temperatures plummeted and power plants failed across the state, Xander's data center automatically switched to backup power. Everything seemed to be functioning normally. But on the third night of the outage, Generator 6 developed a problem. Xander was alone in the facility. His staff had been sent home to deal with their own power emergencies. The generators were housed in a separate building behind the main data center, and Xander made regular checks to ensure they were running smoothly. At 11:30 p.m., the monitoring system showed Generator 6 was producing irregular power fluctuations. Xander bundled up against the freezing cold and walked across the parking lot to investigate. The generator room was warm and loud, filled with the constant rumble of massive diesel engines. Generators 1 through 5 were running perfectly, their status lights glowing green. But Generator 6 was different. Its status panel showed it was running, consuming fuel, and producing power. But the engine wasn't making any sound. In a room where the other 5 generators created a deafening roar, Generator 6 was completely silent. Xander approached the unit for a closer inspection. The engine block was vibrating slightly, as if it was running, but there was no exhaust coming from the pipes, no heat radiating from the engine, no sound at all. According to the digital readouts, Generator 6 was operating at full capacity, providing power to approximately 30% of the data center. But physically, the machine appeared to be turned off. Xander decided to shut down Generator 6 and redistribute the load to the other units. He pressed the emergency stop button, but nothing happened. The silent generator continued its soundless operation, its gauges still showing full power output. He tried the manual fuel cutoff valve. It turned easily, as if shutting off the diesel supply, but the generator's performance didn't change. According to the monitoring system, it was still consuming fuel at a normal rate. That's when Xander noticed something that made his skin crawl. The fuel gauge on Generator 6 wasn't moving. Despite showing fuel consumption on the digital readouts, the physical fuel level hadn't dropped at all. The tank was still completely full, exactly as it had been when the outage began 3 days earlier. A generator running at full capacity for 3 days should have consumed hundreds of gallons of diesel fuel, but Generator 6's tank remained full, while somehow still powering a third of the data center. Xander opened the engine compartment to examine the internal components. What he found defied everything he knew about diesel engines. The pistons weren't moving. The fuel injectors weren't firing. The cooling system wasn't circulating. Every mechanical component was completely stationary, but the electrical output was real. He tested it with a voltmeter. Generator 6 was producing clean, stable power. The servers it was connected to were running normally, processing data, maintaining critical systems for companies across the country. As Xander stared at the impossible machine, he heard something that made his blood freeze. Voices, faint at first but growing clearer, coming from inside the generator itself. They were human voices, dozens of them, all talking at once, in a low, constant murmur. Men and women speaking in different languages, different accents, but all with the same desperate tone. They seemed to be reciting numbers, long strings of digits over and over again. Social security numbers, credit card numbers, bank account numbers, phone numbers, every piece of data stored on the servers that Generator 6 was powering. Xander pressed his ear to the engine block. The voices were definitely coming from inside the machine, as if dozens of people were trapped within the metal housing, endlessly reading out the personal information of millions of strangers. He recognized some of the voices. His own social security number, spoken in his ex-wife's voice. His mother's credit card information, recited in his dead father's distinctive drawl. His daughter's phone number, repeated again and again by what sounded like his childhood best friend. The voices of people from his past, somehow trapped inside a generator that wasn't actually running, forced to speak the private data of people they had never met. Xander tried everything he could think of to shut down Generator 6. He disconnected the electrical cables, but power continued flowing to the servers. He drained the fuel tank, but the consumption readings didn't change. He even tried physically damaging the engine, but his tools seemed to pass right through the metal housing without making contact. For the remaining 4 days of the blackout, Generator 6 continued its impossible operation. The voices inside grew louder and more frantic, as if they knew something terrible was coming. They began speaking not just numbers, but names, addresses, passwords, every secret stored in the data center's servers. When the main power grid was restored, Generators 1 through 5 shut down normally, but Generator 6 kept running. It's still running today, 2 years later, producing power that doesn't officially exist, for servers that shouldn't be operational. The data center company tried to have it removed, but every technician who examines Generator 6 reports the same thing. According to their instruments, there's nothing there. No generator, no electrical connections, no fuel supply. Just an empty concrete pad. But the servers keep getting power from somewhere. And late at night, when the data center is quiet, you can still hear the voices inside the machine that isn't there, endlessly reciting the digital secrets of the living world. The dead, it seems, make excellent data processors. They never sleep, never take breaks, and they remember everything they're told, even after their physical forms have long since disappeared.